Your Worship, councillors, committee members, welcome to our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting today, the 11th of November 2021. No mai haramai, welcome to you all and of course to our staff. Our meeting, I think, is being live streamed, and so to those who are watching from afar, welcome to our meeting this morning. Please turn off your phones.
I rang you, I'm sorry.
So, beg your pardon. So if we could please turn our phones off, and we'll take some breaks so that we can clear our messages, our urgent messages. So thank you. Now the opening prayer this morning was to be by Councillor Bentley. Thank you, Councillor Bentley. But because today is Armistice Day, I would like to invite Councillor McPherson to say the ode. Please, we can all stand, and if there's any few words you'd like to say in remembrance as well, Councillor McPherson. Thank you.
The Maori version of the ode. E kore rātau, e kao mātuatia, pene e tātou kua mahui nei. E kore hoki rātau, e ngoi kore, ko pehea e ngā āhuatanga o te wā. E te hekinga atu o te rā, tai noa ki te āranga mai i te ata. Ka mau mahara tonu tātou ki a rātau. Ka mau mahara tonu tātou ki a rātau. They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors and Your Worship. Many of us can't get to the service today. I mean, I know it's a quite small one, but thank you so much for that, Councillor McPherson. Apologies. Now, we do have apologies from Mr Morgan and Mr Thomas. Yes, Councillor.
For early departure.
Early departure, thank you for that. So we've had Mr Thomas and Mr Morgan. Have a mover and a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. Thank you, Councillor Kumar. It's been moved and seconded that the apologies be accepted. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Any urgent items not on the agenda? Oh, declarations of interest, sorry, yes. Beg your pardon, declarations of interest. Carl. Urgent items not on the agenda? Carl, nothing there, thank you. Confirmation of our minutes. This is for the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 14th of October 2021. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Thank you, Councillor Yates. That the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 14th of October 2021 be confirmed as a true and correct record. It has been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. Oh, sorry. Yes, Councillor Bentley.
Madam Chair, you'll notice that I've got down here as no attendance. I actually did phone one of your staff members and submitted my apologies as I was undergoing an operation at the time.
Oh, thank you.
Rather than have no attendance, can I be recorded as apologies?
Thank you. We so noted. Councillor Donaldson.
So therefore, yes, I can't move in the.
That's right. No, that's true. Yes.
And just to tidy the minutes up, it also shows Councillor Bentley is present, no attendance, and an apology for lateness. So.
Right. So we'll make those. Thank you. Thank you. So you moved, did you, Your Worship? Thank you. And was Councillor? Yeah. Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion with those change corrections. Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Another set of minutes, Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee hearing minutes from the 19th of October 2021. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wang. Thank you, Mrs Trumper. I'm going to say Mrs Thomas. Are there any corrections, amendments? No. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Now we're moving to our staff reports and recommendation. This is item 6 on our agenda, Rotorua Destination Management Plan. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report? Thank you, Councillor Yates. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Got a mover and a seconder that the report, Rotorua Destination Management, be received. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. Contrary, carried. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. JP, you'll introduce everybody and make sure we know who's who. Thank you. Good morning. Oh, Andrew then. Thank you.
Good morning, councillors. Look, I'm not going to say too many things. I'm going to hand it over to the team to work through the presentation. So we've got Joe Holmes, who's our head of Insights and Marketing, and Tessa Richardson, who's one of our marketing team, but who was also responsible for kind of corralling the cats, really. It's probably the best description in terms of what was quite a lengthy process. The quick kind of comment I wanted to make was, look, this plan is obviously for a sector that has done it really, really tough over the last 18 months. You know, not a day goes by that we don't have, you know, some pretty challenging conversations with some of the operators in this space. But I wanted to be clear that, you know, it's an industry that's been part of our DNA for going back probably 150 odd years, and it certainly will continue to be a really critical part of our destination into the future. With that, I just wanted to hand over to Joe, who will take us through the presentation.
Slides.
That little thing over there.
Kia ora koutou. I'm really pleased to be able to share the Rotorua Destination Management Plan with the committee this morning. I'll take the report and the plan as read, but I just wanted to touch on the process that we've been through to get to this point and just highlight some of the key features of the plan this morning. Right. So the point of the Destination Management Plan is that it sets a strategic pathway for sustainable tourism development within the Rohe. And we all want Rotorua to be a thriving visitor destination and, most importantly, bringing benefits to locals through that sector. The DMP works alongside other existing plans, so Vision 2030, Te Arawa Vision 2050, the long-term plan, they've all been acknowledged and referenced within the Destination Management Plan, but the point of this plan is that it is looking at the future of the city through a visitor lens. So there should be lots of complementary actions, lots of crossover, but the point of the DMP is focusing on the visitor experience and the impact of visitors on local Rotorua people. RED was funded by MB through the funding to complete this work last year. This allowed us to appoint 2 contractors to undertake the plan. We've worked very closely with Dave Bamford and Rowan Sapsford, who both are well connected to Rotorua, and that enabled them to kind of hit the ground running and utilise their networks to complete this plan. We're also really grateful for the time and the contribution and the commitment of the project steering group. We had an amazing steering group who met monthly, put a huge amount of time into this plan, and really ensured that we had valuable input from mana whenua, from the wider Te Arawa iwi, from the tourism sector, from central government agencies, as well as Rotorua Lakes Council and RED. The key aim for us at the outset was to ensure that this plan was created in partnership with Te Arawa, and we're really grateful for David Tapsell and Rawiri Waru's direction in this area in particular to make sure that this was a continuous part of the process, that we were able to meet with the right people and get their input throughout. We also committed to genuine and regular consultation with the wider sector and Rotorua community, a huge group of stakeholders. I think we involved directly more than 100 people throughout the process, plus also there were 2 public days where the team went out and spoke to members of the public around the process. And I think a really positive outcome of this consultative approach for me was that when we presented the draft actions to a large group of people who'd been involved, the overwhelming feedback was, if you can do all of these things, Rotorua is going to be in an excellent place. there was nothing missing, there was nothing challenged, it was just accepted, yep, you've got it. So that to me was really, that was a sign that we got this process right. So when we look at the plan on a page, and hopefully you've all got this in front of you, but it's led by a destination vision, he painga mō te ao katoa, for the betterment of all. This came through from one of the Te Arawa workshops, and they referenced this special clause from the 1880 Rotorua Township Agreement, and we all agreed that actually it applies to this piece of work just as well. The plan is for the betterment of mana whenua, for the betterment of all Rotorua people, for the betterment of manuhiri, and also for the betterment of the environment, so all in the broadest sense. That vision is underpinned by 6 destination values, and these capture what's most important about the destination and really provide a guidance for future. We come back to that checklist and make sure that the actions and the way that we're delivering this plan meets those values. They also set out the kind of visitor that we want to attract in the future. So we want visitors that are led by those same values, visitors that come here to enhance the environment, to interact in a meaningful and authentic way with our people, and to add to the prosperity and economic value of the region. There are 4 categories of actions. I'm not going to go through them in detail. Hopefully, you've had a chance to have a look at them and we can answer any questions. But the first of these is capturing the importance of implementation. There's no point in having a plan if you're not actually going to take action. And we've already started that work. A lot of these actions are already underway. We're in the process of appointing a destination manager who will lead the implementation through a fixed-term contract over the next 2 years. And we've been lucky to be funded by MB in the second stage of funding to pay for that role and to pay for the first stages of implementation. We believe we've got a really good mix of transformational change through some actions like the Rotor Commitment and the innovation hubs. There's some really exciting ideas there that are going to really change the city. And we're building on some very strong foundations as well. So there's a whole range of different actions there. But it's also important to note that these aren't all to be delivered by RED. A lot of different entities and organisations are responsible for different parts of the plan, but we will be working in partnership, supporting that work and reporting back and making sure that we're giving regular updates on progress. So as I mentioned, the work is already underway. Today we're asking for acceptance and endorsement by Council for the plan. We're in the process of appointing that critical role that's really going to take us forward, and a number of pieces of work we've started or we're creating plans to complete those. So it's a live plan, and we'll continue to report back on progress over time. Is there anything you want to add?
Thank you. Anything else? Otherwise, thank you. Well, I'll ask if there are questions about the presentation or the report that we've just received, and the any questions. So thank you. Your Worship, thank you.
Thank you, and it's great to get this. They say in the industry, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and this is the right time for us to come up with a destination management plan, and a big tick for you to get this underway and presented today, because the industry, as you said, Andrew, is really tough. The issue there about the Rotorua Pledge, does that mark or match the Tiaki Promise? Because we don't want to have too many brand names swirling around. Can you just clarify that?
The intention behind this is to actually bring in a whole lot of other existing, like the Tiaki Promise,
bring them all together.
Yes, and look at, so the aim is to say, you've already done this work, but how do we add a local flavour to that? So in Rotorua, for example, we want to make sure that Te Arawa's presence is really well represented throughout the city. So we believe that's an important part of our business's promise to manuhiri. I think there's some frameworks we can add around training and development and make that really specific to Rotorua. So it's adding to, but not adding another conflicting piece of...
And I have one other question. Madam Chair. Just the workforce, and this is something that really concerns us at this time with our, the people dropping out of tourism, part-time casualisation or going to other jobs, and the focus on young people finding this as an attractive career. Is it that one person, the destination manager that you appoint, that's going to have to do the liaison with Toil Homai and the other institutes? Because there's a huge gap once the market opens up again.
is a planner by trade, and so has actually done quite a bit of work. I know he worked on the east side framework and plan, and so brought that kind of some of that more sort of technical thinking, making sure that the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. So both, really complementary skills. By their own description, they would say that they didn't lead the work, they supported us, and so certainly the team next to me did all the hard mahi, with ably supported by Dave and Rowan. But certainly this plan reflects the input of those 100 people, that made those contributions. It does really reflect, I think, the industry's view and the view of all the people that engaged. So.
And the second question is, I really read right through the report how comprehensive you had kōrero with Te Aroha, and it's reflected in much of the stuff that you put there, and then also on your page 21 in tier 3 there, the strong emphasis you've placed, Rotorua, supporting Te Aroha in their cultural endeavours. So, whilst it's Aroha mai, not so much a question, but I was just so pleased to see it really embedded in your research and studies. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Councillor Kumar and then Councillor Capsule.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through the Chair, thank you very much, team. It's very good and humbling to see that there's a lot of cultural interaction that's going to take place. I believe when a lot of people travel again, there'll be a lot of people that will be looking for adventure. Rotorua used to be a place where they could come for adventure, but also a lot of people will be looking for cultural. What's that? I have a couple of questions. One is, have we set a budget and how we're going to measure this going forward? I know that probably can't be answered as to how we can measure that, but we probably know when you buy a lolly, in a simple analogy, and you plan to sell it for an amount, you say this is where your profit and loss is. So for any action plan that we taking forward, because this is going to be quite a very cohesive and to bring the tourists back. This is taking us forward. And the cultural aspect of dealing and engaging with Te Arawa is going to be very influential in this. So how are we going to take this overlay and make sure that that is present going forward, that there is more cultural as per what we discussed? My other question is...
Perhaps we just have answered that question first and then we'll...
Look, in terms of the, there were a couple of questions in there. The one around the measures, look, certainly we monitor really closely a whole range of metrics in relation to the visitor economy, and one of the key things we'll be looking at is, how do we lift that sort of value contribution? And we're really hot on that. And for us, it's, the transformational piece will be when we can lift the, the ratio of, expenditure against the kind of jobs that sit in this space. So there's been a bit of a mismatch in the past. So we're looking to really lift the value. And I think our conversations with industry and particularly with a lot of our iwi and cultural experiences is absolutely on that page. So we've been a number of discussions and they're ongoing around their expectation that they're going to shift the type of visitor they're looking to attract, and they want to have a more meaningful engagement with and to offer a more premium product. So certainly I think the whole flavour of this is very much about how do we shift the dial and look to move up that value contribution.
Thank you. And just supplementary to that is, I see over there it's appointed destination manager on a 2-year contract. Have we earmarked anyone, because we are probably looking for a very specific person, and that person has to fit in to wanting to work for the 2 years?
Well, we're literally in the middle of the recruitment process. So the role has, applications closed on Monday, so we're about to start interviews. But you're right, it is a really specific role. We need great project management skills. We need understanding of the tourism industry, understanding of project management and budgeting and fund raising, working with central government. So we're hopeful we'll find the right person. We've got some good candidates that we'll get to meet hopefully next week.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I just add a couple of other aspects to it, which was around the delivery against this plan. This plan will underpin the statement of intent that RED then presents back to you. So they'll be seeking to give effect to the actions that are relevant to their delivery through their statement of intent. Some of these actions also cross over, as Joe indicated, back into council. So they'll also form part of my team's business plan over the next year as well. So when we report back against the strategy's delivery, it's actually going to be multiple parties who have contributed to those actions and their delivery.
Thank you. Councillors, we've got virtually every councillor wants to speak or ask a question, so I am going to ask if you could be quite succinct with putting your questions, please. Yes, Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Chair, through you. Kia ora koutou. First, about the workforce development, thank you so much for putting that there. Our people are our greatest asset, and it was just heartbreaking, the sudden and significant unemployment as a result of COVID for our local economy and local people here. So thank you for involving that, and I do wholeheartedly support the training and upskilling as well as addressing fair wages and the wider housing issues that come with that, because the sun will shine again and we need to be ready for it. The first question I have, touching on Her Worship the Mayor around the Rotorua Commitment, is just what benefits will there be for operators too? I know as operators kickstart again once tourism picks up, their affordability options are quite limited, so just ensuring that they will receive the benefit for whatever sum that they pay to be part of that partnership. And then just a second question around the events. Events are incredibly important for Rotorua, as we know, but what work is also being done to make sure that internally, when someone wants to host an event, it's a very easy process. They know who to get in touch with, from being interested in holding a major event all the way down to the details of liquor licensing. And I ask that question because we can throw the rod out and try to attract people externally, but we need to also ensure that internally we have a smooth transition for people to make sure we secure those events. So Rotorua Commitment and the events, thank you.
Through the chair, the Rotor Commitment won't have a cost per se associated with it, so it won't be a, we're asking for industry to make a kind of a contribution, I guess, in terms of finance. It's more about trying to bind the industry together in terms of, what is the commitment they're making to the destination, and so our view is that could take a variety of kind of shapes depending on what's particularly important to that business. So, the contribution could be something along the lines of ensuring that all staff are paid a living wage. It could be actually ensuring that actually we've put all of our team through, a training module that actually means that they can report back, or they can speak fluent te reo, or they can speak to the stories of this place. It's really about trying to bind the industry together, and with a coalition willing, I guess, probably the best description I can give. In terms of the event space, we were fortunate through the Regional Events Fund to get a little bit of money put aside to complete a events strategy. So that work's kind of nearly complete, but hopefully that should address some of the queries that you've written in terms of, how do we make sure internally we're well arranged and making it as easy as possible for event organisers.
Can I just add something on Rotor Commitment? For me, one of the aspirations, that the experience that manuhiri get is every point of their journey here is exceptional because of the work that's being done through this commitment. But the other is that it creates a framework that makes Rotorua an attractive place to work. So if you want to work in tourism, you've got plenty of opportunities, but you would want to come to Rotorua because you've got this framework that supports you, that develops you, that gives you a pathway. And that's two other aspects of it. Yeah.
Councillor McPherson, then Councillor Yates.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I've really enjoyed reading this. It's historically and culturally embedded. There's great clarity over the values, the directions and the actions, and I'm sure the coming SOI. So my question is, with the director's appointment, can we expect project plans more fine-tuned that integrate objectives with phases, budgets, finance sources and outcome indicators for public accountability purposes?
Through the chair, I guess the simple answer would be yes, there certainly will be project plans developed up for each of the actions. Look, it'll depend on what the action is. I wouldn't want to promise that we'd be making all of those publicly available. I think where appropriate we would, but yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Yates.
Ka pai, through you, Madam Chair. Tēnā koutou. Nei rau te mihi kau atu mō tēnei o a tātou nei tuhinga. My question is related to page 22, and like Councillor Maxwell, I'd like to applaud you on the involvement of Te Arawa, in particular 10.1, Te Arawa Reo and Cultural Toolkit, which I look forward to. My question is, have you considered working with Te Tatau in the endeavour to work across all of our businesses here in Rotorua in a simple address when welcoming manuhiri or when welcoming anyone into their shops or businesses with a kia ora?
Kia ora, yes, that is certainly part of so that piece of work is definitely working with Te Tatau. And there are a number of initiatives underway, and one, for example, is Manaaki program, which is being revisited. And the point of that is it's an online program that particularly focusing on hospitality at this stage, but there's a cultural language component, which is exactly that, teaching everybody the basics and how to welcome people, use the reo in their everyday life, and trying to roll that out to all businesses over time.
Yes.
Just supplementary, and then the other supplementary to that part was around the gateways, and in particular the cultural gateways that I look forward to seeing developed over the next 2 years, and just to comment and congratulate you on what has already been achieved, and I look forward to seeing what we have in the future. Kia ora.
Thank you. Mr. Biasini-Tule.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Kia ora tātou. Thank you for the report. Just it's not bad as a question, sorry. What's the simple message to whānau impacted by tourism and looking forward toward the horizon?
I think the simple message is to be optimistic about the future. You know, I think all the signs when you look globally are that we will see tourism back. I think that we've got a bright future ahead in terms of the sector. It will look different, and I think that's absolutely appropriate. And I think when we talked to the industry, there was a really uniform feel that it should look different. You know, we should look and strive to be a better, you know, slightly different destination in terms of the way that we present ourselves.
Councillor Donaldson and then Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think so that last question should have been get vaccinated, is probably. However, my question relates to the action for Rotorua, the transformational action for Rotorua to be the centre of wellness for Aotearoa. You know, it's something we've talked about for quite some time, but I love the way that the tasks are related to the vision, he painga mō te ao katoa. I think that's really interesting, but I look at action 4.3 within 6 months. Sure, commitment explores the opportunity. Resource to you know, get this implementation moving along. That's my question. Thank you.
Yes, so that, as we mentioned before, we're really fortunate to have some funding that has been provided that will enable us to start the implementation process, and in most cases will be, as Andrew mentioned, putting together strategies and plans to take these forward. So there are pieces of work that have been completed. In terms of this wellness one, the first step is, what does that strategy look like? How do we create a framework? How do we put some more detailed measures in place? And then what is the timeline and what other funds are needed to drive that? So this initial funding and this role will allow us to actually put a full strategy behind that and link it in with the commitment. I think the commitment actually sits across everything, so we want to make sure that wellness is part of it and that we're looking after our people. So they're all interlinked, but yeah. Does that answer your question?
Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Andrew, thank you and your team for your presentation this morning. And my question is in regard to this vacancy that you've gotten candidates for. Does this vacancy have a written job description?
Through the chair, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Councillor Kai Fong, then Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, team, for all the work that you've been doing on this, and thank you for the presentation this morning. Just a question around the Tier 2 investing for a positive future. So we've got to focus on providing quality accommodation, but there seems to be some concern in the community that we don't have enough accommodation, excuse me, because we are using it for transitional housing, but just how that sort of works in with the work that you're doing, and perhaps JP, a comment around the work that you're doing.
Through the chair, look, I think the accommodation space is a really complex one. I think people underestimate how many different factors are at play in that space. The observation we'd certainly make, and we've spent some time obviously on this, is that at the moment we've got lots of accommodation, and the simple answer is that we've actually got a lot of accommodation providers that are doing it really tough. Occupancy levels are really low. Domestic has no way filled the gap that was created when the borders were shut, and so we've certainly got a lot of vacant space, basically. One of the challenges we've faced, and this is sort of going back even pre-COVID, was that we had, if you took, I guess, a couple of comparisons between ourselves and Queenstown, you could look at the reports that would have said our hotel occupancy was probably running at around about 85%, which was very, very similar to Queenstown. When we looked at the number of rooms that were planned or under construction, I think we had 150. Queenstown had about 3,500. simple reality is that our yields and the returns that our accommodation sector were making was just too low. When you really dig into the data there, it's a byproduct of having too many motels probably at that space and too many low quality rooms available in the market, just pulling yields backwards. And so our role is how are we lifting yields, how are we making that a really attractive investment proposition for either reinvestment into existing stock or new stock. And so I think that continues to be a really clear driver for us as we want to make this a really attractive place so that we can actually see new rooms planned or actually under construction.
Thank you. And Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, morena koutou. Thank you so much for this presentation this morning, and I feel really confident and really optimistic of the future reading through this document. My question was around the Tiaki Taiao, the enhancing the environment, and it's great to see RED planning on becoming a carbon zero organisation within 12 months, and also the focuses around the mitigation and actually planning ahead for those future risks as well. My question was really surrounding how would RED support those businesses, and I note that the Rotorua Sustainable Charter is mentioned on here. How would RED support those businesses into transitioning into whether it be ecotourism or just be more sustainable in those areas? Because it's another thing that's kind of sometimes seen as a costly move, but in reality actually has a value in itself to be transitioning to a sustainable business as well. So what other actions, I guess, would be made in this space?
Thank you. So, yes, I think importantly we need to lead the way, which we've addressed in here. And then we are, the Rotorua Sustainable Charter is the key mechanism. I think we're a supporter of it, we fund it, we're a member of the board and been heavily involved, and we've recognised that actually that entity, Rotorua, is unique in having this charter. It was the first one established. Other cities have tried to replicate it and it just hasn't succeeded. So we believe that it needs, if we can get behind it, support it and really encourage businesses to work with the charter. They're getting some fantastic results. They've got the technical ability, as I think you've heard recently at a presentation. And then there's the other aspect is around supporting innovation in this space through the Innovation Hub. So to your first question around how we encourage businesses to have a more environmental focus, there's a real demand internationally for experiences that allow you to give back to the environment and regenerative tourism. And we believe there's a real opportunity for Rotorua to lead the way. We don't have a lot of businesses that meet that standard. So I think there's a real opportunity for that innovation hub to drive ideas to really give international tourists a chance to be part of that journey with us.
Thank you, and I think absolutely there's a great opportunity there for Rotorua to be seen as a green city and a green destination as well. And following on from Councillor Tapsell's comments that our people are our biggest assets, and I think following on from that, our culture and our environment are definitely up there as well as major assets for our district. So thank you very much, and I really look forward to seeing how that progression all goes.
Thank you, Councillor Wang. Any further questions? I do have a question, Andrew, and it's around the role of the NGO sector, because you are taking a holistic approach. You're looking at 4 wellbeings, and I'm not sure if you've got those links in there already, but they are quite significant and they're influential, well linked into government agencies, and many of the people who work in the NGO sector, I believe, would be beneficial in assisting in this, so I'm just not sure if you've thought about a role for them at some stage, and actually earlier rather than later.
Look, I think that's a really good point, Councillor, and certainly we're very open to work with any organisation that wants to help to deliver upon that vision. So certainly the NGO space is one that, there are some really incredible people that work across there, and you're 100% correct, they've got some fantastic links. So, we'll certainly look forward to working with any and all that are on the same sort of journey.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Now, could I have a mover and a seconder, please, that the committee recommends to Council to accept and endorse the Destination Management Plan and next steps outlined within this paper. Thank you, Councillor Wang. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Open for any further discussion? Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me one more. I'm sure it's in the report, but had any strong thought gone towards including somewhere sport personalities, people who come from Rotorua who are doing well, even in the world, on the world stage? Stephen Adams, Sam Cane is our All Black captain now, Danny Lee with golf, and also Israel Adesanya, but it looks like he's not going to come back. But these people, I love it when I see their name and the pronouncers talk about they're from Rotorua and all that. It makes us feel proud. Is there any way that we're going to include them in some way? Thank you, Andrew.
Through the chair, look, we certainly do work with those individuals where they make themselves available, I guess is the simple answer. So that's a campaign question. So Jo and her team obviously work up our marketing campaigns and where those individuals choose to be available. Where we've got those types of people involved, we generally don't pay them for their time, and so there are some, we're generally looking for people that have got a passion about this place and are certainly looking to volunteer their time to and their profile to contribute.
Thank you.
Your Worship, did you have? Thank you.
Look, I can't let the moment go by, but thank you, because I believe there's only a couple of other places in New Zealand that have even started the journey of a destination management plan. It was one of 21 recommendations in the Future of Tourism Task Force report, and it's great. I'm proud that Rotorua has led the way here to get this completed in front of us today. But there's a very profound statement in here in your vision that this is for the betterment of all, because tourism isn't separate from our community. No. And our community feeling part of a visitor destination includes our own families and awhiing those that will come in from Auckland and Waikato soon. And that is a wonderful vision, because we've always seen it as a product, a tourism product that sat out there and was sort of managed by others. It's part of us all, and that's what I love in the vision. The other aspect of this that I think can't go by without saying is everywhere in the world you can have some of the natural assets that we've got, geothermal, lakes, forests, and the one difference for us here is our people and our culture. And you've strengthened that through, which makes us, will put us really on the roadmap again, and I thank you for that. I love the outcomes that you've got in each action, and that's really what this is all about, and some fast delivery, time-framed. Well done for this. I look forward to seeing this come to fruition and putting Rotorua right up there again, as we were prior to the first COVID outbreak, and also the links with wider New Zealand. We are joining up now, and your comment, Madam Chair, about the NGO sector, volunteering is a very important part for our community with events such as Crankworks. How many can you dial up overnight when you need them, if the spectators could come? But they're very keen to set up a base here in Rotorua too, because they see where we're going with our destination. So this is fantastic to have a plan. Love the consultants that you got in. See the links with conservation and the environment. So we'll drive our own destiny, and thank you for that work.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. if I read yesterday's paper in the travel section, it says that tourism is going to come out worldwide stronger and more robust than what we've ever seen before. And you've got to take great heart from that, you know. And I believe people are really sick and tired of being locked up, and so they are going to come exploring all sorts of destinations. A couple of things that I want to talk about. I think, I hope that, as Monsieur has said, and I think we spoke in 2019 about what objected to our areas, the gateways into Rotorua. We need to make a you know, you've arrived here, you know, you get that buzz again. And wouldn't it be great if Rotorua was like Venice, where Venice wants to now stop people coming from there or put a levy because they are over tourist.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to say that, Your Worship, you were quite right, that this is a planned approach to our future. It's not a hit and miss. It's really quite exciting, to be honest. And I mean, nobody wants to say there's a good side and upside to COVID, but what it has done, it's focused us really on the future, and it's reflected here, and the future is in front of us, and we need to drive it forward for the betterment of all. So thank you very much for your presentation today and the work that's gone into producing this. Kia ora. Thank you. Oh, I've got to put it. Yes, right. So we've had a mover and a seconder that the committee recommends to Council to accept and endorse the Destination Management Plan and next steps outlined within this paper. So it's been moved and seconded, and it has, hasn't it? Yes, thank you. It's been moved and seconded. So I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Carried. Our next agenda item, Rotorua Housing and Business Development Capacity Assessment. That's on page 25. So this is JP. Anor.
Morena, Madam Chair. Beside me today, and I'm just introducing him again, you've met him before, is Damon Mathfield. So Damon's our principal advisor in the urban development space. So a critical person for really leading our responses to the National Policy Statement on urban development and really leading some of that.
I'll just move for a mover in a second that we received the report, and then we'll get straight into it. Thank you, JP. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please, that the report Rotorua Housing and Business Development Capacity Assessment be received? Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you, Councillor Yates. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Carried.
So, Madam Chair, again, having just introduced Damon here, he and another one of the team, Sean Callis, have been working extensively over the last 12 months on what is an essential technical document that underpins so much of our response to the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, and drives the reasoning and the detail as to plan changes we need to make to support intensification in housing development. So how do we get homes in the right places? How do we create thriving communities? And how do we make sure our housing types address the needs for our community? So this presentation is probably a little longer than usual because we have provided you with our draft housing and business assessment. So I'll give you a reassurance, there's about one slide per 20 to 40 pages worth of content. So we'll try and summarise what is an extensive technical document for you and just guide you through it. So I'm looking for a remote between us, so we're just going to do a tag team across this because, as I say, it is an important document that underpins a lot of our urban development and planning for the next few years. So, councillors, I've said this as a a technical document, but it really goes to some of the thinking and the necessity about making sure we have sufficient land, sufficiently infrastructure enabled, commercially feasible and reasonably expected land to be developed for housing. So this is a sort of a theoretical kind of model where you start at one level and there's a shrinking down to eventually what actually gets built. So you need to actually have an over provision of planned land or enabled land so that the market can adjust and we can see a delivery of housing. So it's all about supply. So as you go through, we go through this presentation, you'll see how we step down through each of those frameworks, and it's also something that underpins how the reports are structured. So it's very much centred on how the National Policy Statement on Urban Development is created to make sure there is sufficient supply of housing for communities to meet their demands. So I'll just take a break there and just enabled Damon to go through the next bit. Damon?
I think just in terms of an evidence base, as JP said, this really provides a platform for us to do our planning better, to deliver on housing. So as an evidence base, there are two assessments. One is the housing capacity assessment, and I suppose that's what a lot of us are interested in terms of how we deal with the housing issue. But in terms of how the evidence base is packaged up, firstly, there's a plan-enabled component, and that really relates to our district plan that we currently have. But also, it talks to our forward planning documents. So what we used in this case is we've got a spatial plan that was done in 2018. So that really provided a good understanding, I suppose, from a planning perspective, our housing capacity, but also, I suppose, where it starts getting into the nuts and bolts is our what is infrastructure ready. So it's all very well having a district plan that states that we're providing for development, but where's the infrastructure in the ground? So in the short term, it's what we have in terms of existing infrastructure in the ground. But then if we start looking to the longer, medium term, I suppose if we start looking to the medium term, it's what we planned in terms of our LTP for infrastructure, and the long term is what effectively is captured in our infrastructure, long-term infrastructure strategy. So then it's, even if we've got all that, we've got the infrastructure and we've, I suppose, got what's plan enabled, it's still what is commercially feasible. So what are our developers actually, where do they actually want to develop? And for this, part of the work that we did was to survey developers to get their understanding about not just what they're doing currently, but their future intent. And then once you've got all of that together, you get a sense of what's reasonably expected to be realized. So that's, you know, you've got a good sense then of what effectively will be delivered. In a similar way, our business capacity assessment talks firstly to what's plan enabled in our district plan, also what was captured in our spatial plan, which in the future will be a future development strategy. And then what is infrastructure ready, as I explained previously. And then very much in terms of business capacity, it's what's suitable for business. You know, business has a number of drivers of what makes things viable, so access to location in terms of tourism, and obviously in terms of retail and commercial activity, you would want to be in the hub like the CBD. So what is suitable for that development? Then I suppose an important thing, and I suppose this is generally what's discussed, is what is the picture of demand? So a very important part of the assessment is capturing the number of dwellings that we need to know we need to deliver to keep up with demand. So in the short term, which is over the next 3 years, we're looking at an additional 3,560 dwellings. So where that number came from was that if effectively we're starting from a deficit position. We know we've got about 1,500 houses to deliver before we can get to zero. So we're starting from that position, but we also use the infometric projections, which talk about effectively, I suppose it's the data that shows what we should be delivering to meet population growth. But added to that, the NPS requires us to add another 20% to that to allow for competition, because it's no good just meeting demand with your housing, because then effectively your prices stay high. You know, you need to have a sufficient competition or sufficient conditions to allow for, I suppose, competition in the market. So that's just where the numbers came from. So in the medium term, I know we spoke about 6,000, but if we add that sort of, you know, those equations, we're talking about effectively 6,240 dwellings, to be precise, over the next 10 years that we need to provide for. And then the long term, which is the 30-year period, we're looking at 9,740 dwellings. And this effectively needs to then be included in our district plan through a technical plan change. So it effectively sits as targets within our plan to deliver on. I think it's quite important to note, and this came out of our demand analysis, and I think it's, I suppose, one of the key findings is that our demand profile over time is changing. So the fact is that we see a lot of 3 to 4 bedroom homes, but in the future, the demand for those homes will decrease based on the fact that a larger proportion of our population will be either single-headed or couple-headed households. So effectively the demand, most of that growth will be in that category, and also we're in an aging population, so a larger part of our population will be older in the future. So we certainly need to be thinking, I suppose the strong message from this is that we need to be thinking about how do we cater for a potential topology shift where we have a greater demand for 1 and 2 bedroom type developments. I think just a key thing to bear in mind is, this is now going back to our district plan, is that we've got plenty of capacity that's provided for in the district plan as it stands. But as JP was saying, the reality is that there's still the issue of having sufficient land that's infrastructure ready, and then even more complicated is where is it commercially feasible across that space to allow for that, well, to enable that development to happen, and then also what is reasonably expected to be realised. So you will see in this report, obviously a significant number in terms of what can be enabled through the plan, which is 23,700 additional dwellings, and in the long term, you know, a bigger number, obviously 29,800 additional dwellings, but obviously effectively not all of that will be delivered. And one of the key reasons that we know that we need to address is that there's limited opportunities in the plan for developing those kind of topologies we're going to expect to see in the futures, which is the 1 to 2 bedroom homes. We've got a very small area that is zoned for medium density, and we've also got reasonably large lot sizes, so an average lot size of 450 and a minimum of 350 meters squared. So we know that potentially we need to look at a reduction in the lot size in relevant areas, but also it's a case of knowing where we need to provide for height across the district in order to get a commercially feasible situation.
Just picking up again from Damon, he started to talk about some of those constraints, and one of the ones that was highlighted obviously is the market and the number of property holders. So the more diversity in the available lots and multiple owners means that somewhere in the market something will move. So one of our constraints is obviously some of the land on the eastern side is all held within one land ownership, and particularly some of our future growth areas, which was leasehold as well. So again, finding a viable model for leasehold development is still a critical pathway and a constraint that currently exists for us for what could be some substantial growth in the future. So that's an impact for us. Also affecting some of that commercial feasibility, and you're absolutely aware of these, the land hazards, so soft ground, geothermal, normal flooding, and changes around climate are also critical factors that just often limit the feasibility of some of that development because of costs. So I think one of the things that Damon just started to highlight for us, and it comes to this sort of response here, is as you can see, the demand for dwellings is quite high, but also the need then to say actually the types of homes and the size of homes needs to change. So for us there, we start saying, well, actually that's really important for us to start looking at where we can see those smaller housing units being developed. So we've got lots of apartment capacity in the CBD, so it already exists. You know, we've got a height limit of about 20 metres in the CBD, but we have got some constraints around the sizes of apartments. Now for us, we don't have a mature apartment market, so there's actually a bit of a market proofing that is important for us, and of course that was why we entered into the change in direction for RED, so that we can actually start working with some partners to try and put that proof point in place around apartment developments within the CBD. So the other issue that Damon started to touch on, and it's something that's critical for us to start thinking as we go into intensification plan changes, is how we start enabling the sort of the missing middle. And I think we've got a little bubble that pops into it. So if you think of that housing continuum on the bottom of the page there, we're very good at having large footprint residential lots with a single dwelling on it, and maybe a subsidiary dwelling. So we're very good at the 3, 4, 5 bedroom home on a section of somewhere between 450 and 800 square metres, and really that's what the city was built on. So we look back in our history to say that's formed and shaped most of our suburbs. What we are missing as a evolving and a climate-adjusted, sustainable community moving forward is those other housing types that give us that missing middle. So for us, it's really important to really start thinking about the provisions and the rules we have to enable that. So one of those constraints we currently have is we've got quite a small medium density zone, which you can almost see in the maps on the right, so a little bit of Fenton Park and a little bit of Glenholm and Whakatau blocks, so quite limited expanse of medium density area. And then also some of our rules also create quite prescriptive constraints around what's permitted and how much of a site can be used. That's things like setbacks from the front yards and the side yards and the backyards, so decreasing the size where a home can go, and that really affects our ability to see multiple dwellings, terraces, duplexes, second dwellings on sites. So that's one of the challenges we've got to take into our planning moving forward. So obviously the report highlights some of the things that we already know. A significant issue for the future growth of the city is our capacity for stormwater. So as I say, this is a technical document that provides the proof point that we've been talking about for a number of years and led to us making our Infrastructure Acceleration Fund application to government to try and address some of the obvious problems we've got around climate implications for our key streams, but also the capacity of our stormwater network to take more frequent and more severe weather events as we start looking to intensification. Also some minor issues were highlighted, and that's really around things like network extensions in areas like Nongataha, so a future growth node, but at this stage not been factored into the planning for that. And obviously the other part which also goes to our financial constraints around moving forward with almost lead infrastructure is having the timing and being clear about when we need that infrastructure in place for greenfield developments. So we've got multiple areas. Where do we need to start taking on the costs of those up front? So some issues around that network development. So just checking which ones, was that my one again? So again, I think I've touched on some of the stuff. We really do need to consider our rules around site sizes so that we can better enable homes of a smaller size in the right locations. So that's a critical piece there. So from a sustainability and a future urban development perspective, you know, where's our good access to reserves and open spaces? Where's our good access to local shopping centres so that you get that walkable catchment? And where's our good access to public transport? Critical critical networks and infrastructure for us as we move forward. We really do need to start looking at the extent of our medium density zone so that the market is better able to deliver some other options in a lot wider area of space. And also make sure that we've got a clear view of how we're going to provide that infrastructure into those greenfield areas that we want to see progressed, because that's the key enabler there. And again, from the analysis in this report, this is critical if we're to make sure our supply starts meeting actually the demands we have in our community, and therefore hopefully will change some of that affordability picture and give some other options to those in our community.
Yeah, just in terms of the findings from our business capacity assessment, I think the good thing is that we've got sufficient capacity for business demand in the short term, but we need to start planning now for the medium term. And we may have insufficient capacity for zone land for business in the medium term, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. Some of the land with business opportunity is in Māori-owned land, and there are, I suppose, there are models for delivery, but we need to work through those to ensure that we've got sufficient capacity for business in those areas. We also have a shortfall of land for industrial growth, and this is particularly in relation to light industrial activities in the medium term. So medium term obviously being in 10 years' time, but we need to be planning for that now. And light industrial activities is typically your warehousing and your types of industry that is not your smokestack and high noise. So often it's complementary with some of your commercial spaces closer to your CBD. In the long term, and now we're talking towards the 30-year horizon, there is potential for an emerging need for more visitor accommodation. Despite the fact that you see a lot of it here now, we anticipate obviously growth in the tourism sector, and we need to be thinking strategically about how we provide for visitor accommodation going into the future. Obviously, our location relevant to specific attractions that's not going to change. So you would expect demand to increase. Also, once again, light industry demand raised its head. The fact is that we've got to continue providing for that. And I think it's primarily because of our strategic location as Rotorua in terms of its ability to service regionalised industry. So I suppose it's a reflection on, Rotorua's demand for the industrial sector. So we need to be providing for that in the long term as well. Just on getting into more detail around the business recommendations is, I think in some of the findings, which we're still working through with the service provider, but some sort of key findings just to highlight is just to encourage, a key thing was a recommendation was to encourage the redevelopment of central commercial zones through large-scale initiatives in strategic locations. So essentially we've started doing that, I guess, with the lakefront, the Performing Arts Centre. It's really about providing these flagship initiatives that attract business in. And I think the importance of that is that it also signals to the market, that there's a changing face within the CBD, and certainly it makes things like apartments type living more attractive if you've got a vibrant CBD. So part of the work we're also doing is looking at an inner city revitalisation plan that will try and address that. Also, I think we mentioned the spatial plan from 2018 that identified key locations for future development, and in that, obviously, land in Nongatai had been identified for future mixed-use zoning, and I guess it was just saying in the medium term we should be looking at doing those investigations to bring that, I suppose, that land into the district plan so we can start effectively planning for the increased demand for mixed-use type development. And mixed-use in this sense is looking at residential together with retail and commercial, and that's certainly where the demand is. And then to also pursue mixed-use zoning along Fenton Street, a key location, obviously, in terms of future mixed-use development, so looking at retail, commercial and tourist accommodations. And I guess we're seeing obviously a lot of, the reality is there's a lot of tourist accommodation activities, but we're not really seeing it fully developed as a mixed-use zone where we see residential together with retail and commercial in the purest sense, and we would need to be zoning for that because currently it's zoned otherwise. And then we also need to consider opportunities or incentives for increasing building heights in the central areas. I think a key thing is that, in fact, the reality that we, it is permitted to develop apartments within the CBD, but it's still not feasible. And one of the issues is whether we've got the height right, potentially for a break-even point, developers need to effectively build higher than 6 floors. So that will be part of the investigation that we need to look at when we start doing our intensification plan changes. How far do we push the height in order to obviously get the development economics to work within those areas? And we also need to continue to plan for zoning for leasehold business land in the eastern area. So, we were aware that we had started doing some investigations around a plan change on east side, and I think out of that, it was determined that there was potential for light industrial zoning / business park zoning, and I think the findings was that we needed to take that forward and look at that more carefully in terms of how we can provide for that. I think obviously having the airport that side as well as a key location for complementary types of industrial activity. And then also, we need to investigate, I suppose, parking management strategies for workers and encouraging mode shift. So now this is looking forward into the future, assuming we've obviously got residential living along Fenton Street and in the CBD. Obviously, one of the issues that we want to do is ensure that it's an environment that services walkability, but also meets the need for people that are coming into the CBD to access shopping. So the difference now is, I suppose, people are living in the suburbs and driving in, but in the future you envisage people living in the CBD. So it's a very different scenario when you've got obviously people that we were walking from residents living inside the CBD versus driving in. Potentially you'd need less parking in the future, but obviously we need to work through the realities of change over time. It's when that demand comes on stream that we need to potentially be looking at that shift. The other issue is the fact that we need to address the issue of climate change as well, and encouraging mode shift is an important part of that component.
So, councillors, just in summary then, this has been a significant piece of work that's underpinned our requirements under the National Policy Statement. So market economics have spent a huge amount of time doing this analysis for us. So I think drawing all of this together, we think it's very affirming of the strategies that we have identified over the last few years. So you look back at our spatial plan 2018, and some of the thinking that led to some key targets being identified into our long-term plan. This is the technical confirmation of the direction we're going. So 6,000 homes, the need to really pursue the intensification, the need to address our CBD height opportunities and multi-use. In the report, it talks about 23 hectares worth of industrial or light industrial land being required. I think we put the target in the long-term plan of 25 hectares. So critical deliverables for us that we've built into our long-term plan are being affirmed through this piece of research that should now underpin some of our planning decisions over the next year. So really pleased with this response and this information. We now need to look at finalising it. So we need to make sure those conclusions have been tested amongst the technical staff before we finalise this working document. Then we'll then notify the Minister of the Environment that it's been completed. And then when they have confirmed their acceptance of the piece of work by market economics, we have to insert those housing bottom lines into our district plan, because that's a critical element to say that's what we need to start working towards. And then we've got of other pieces of technical work that lead us to the important policy changes and plan changes that must be delivered by August of next year. So certainly our view is that we need to start looking at that much earlier. And then also picking up on this need to create a greater focus on the CBD and the central city. So we start talking into Glenholm, Fenton Park, the core of our urban area as an area of focus. The last piece there, which is another requirement of the future, is a future development strategy. It's not due for a couple of years, but because of the need for us to move very quickly on our changes in our planning and our direction to ensure we're able to start progressing the homes we need to for our community, we really need to bring forward the development of that future development strategy. It's an important communication piece for our community and sets the direction for us over the next 10, 20 years. And out beyond that. So really it's our spatial plan 2.0. So it's critical we start working on that. So really we wanted to make sure we briefed you on this now, but as we progress towards finalising that plan, because it does lead into a range of critical conversations around priority development areas and certainly plan changes over the next year or so. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, JP. I have to say, just another exciting piece of work that's come before us today. But I have to say it's quite exhausting listening to you in terms of the mahi that has to be done. And as you said, it's not even 12 months actually, for August of next year. So look, councillors, what I'm going to do is we'll take a break. I think we'll take a break and then we'll get into some questions. So if we take 15 minutes break and be back just 11:05. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Just a moment.
I just had a pie, so I'm more energised.
Pardon? Thank you. Thank you. We're going to go into questions now. I know that a number of you, of course, have some questions, but Councillor McPherson did leave something with me, and he asked if it could be tabled, and he's not here, and so I'd like to table that first so that we can move along and discuss this or move this one along. So I don't know if you've had a copy. Thank you. I'm not sure if you've got one. Would you like one? I can. All right, thank you. I don't know if he distributed one, and normally I wouldn't, but I mean, if somebody wants to have say something and they're not here, then it is acceptable to accept a document. So I don't know if I'm not going to read it.
No, Madam Chair, if you like, I can paraphrase.
No, thank you. Sorry. Yes, JP.
So Councillor McPherson just asked us why don't we use Stats New Zealand projections, and that provides a different answer, and therefore are we over-egging our planning? I suppose this goes to some of the questioning of the detailed work that we're undertaking. So I actually think it's one of these situations where you go off and find some different information to confirm a point. So to me, it's actually a bit disappointing, because it actually undermines the significant investment that we're undertaking in making sure we use good, credible research companies to undertake this research. So can I just make so Stats New Zealand's model is extremely simple. They start with a macro picture of New Zealand, and it's in-out, deaths, and then they apply some regional information to that. So it's actually reasonably okay as a model until you get to below the sub-regional view, because then it's just chopped up again to get down to a sub-regional view. So it does not take into account some of the local impacts that actually can quite dramatically shift the actual results and give us, so it's a very blunt modelling framework. So what I wanted to do was to put this in front of you, because this actually goes to one of the challenges we've had with not taking a more nuanced and diverse view about what is happening locally and building that into a projection model. So that's what we've done previously with Burl, and we're currently doing with Infometrics. So this is a graph I've shown you ad infinitum. So you can see here the bars going from my left to right start showing our population, which again goes through that stagnation period. So the two lines that then deviate off there is the 2015 and the 2017 Stats New Zealand projections. So whilst they're doing that view of the national figures, in, out, births, deaths, they get it down to sub-regional, they then do a model which backcasts and forward projects. So a city that is stagnating is clearly going to show that kind of line going forward. So it does not pick up changes or nuances about what is happening in your local economy and the demand and the population movements. So that is why we commissioned, I think when we started preparing the spatial plan, Burl, to start looking at some other data sets. And what data we got from Burl started to show some extremely interesting numbers around jobs and employment development within some of our key sectors. So that appeared to run extremely contrary to the simple Stats New Zealand model. So we used that to then say, actually, there's something different happening here. So we used that to nuance our population projections that were underpinned the spatial plan and went into our last LTP. So we've changed providers, but we've again taken the view that we need to see a nuanced projection of population based on the circumstances that exist in our community. And there are some interesting things that happen in our community. So one of the most obvious ones is we have an extremely high Māori population, and what we've seen with a number of economic shocks and COVID responses is there's a lot of te arawa coming home. So that does not get picked up. So we do not have a nuancing around population and ethnicity and iwi affiliations coming through that stuff, unless we have that communications and that discussion with the companies doing those kind of projections. Nor do they have a view across into information about employment and employment changes within our district. So when you have a back casting and a forward casting, you can now see, and it's circled on this graph, and I've shown it to you before, the yellow line there is the 2021 Stats New Zealand projections. So again, when you start looking at how they do their modelling, it's a simple framework, it's a back casting and it's a forward casting, it's an ageing population, births and deaths. So that becomes, it is a baseline. Now, I'm not saying it does not have its value, it clearly has its value, and it is clearly an input into what Infometrics then does. But we have continued to focus on ensuring that we have additional reporting that tries to look at the economic conditions within the Bay of Plenty and specifically within our district. And for us, we've had confidence certainly from the Burl projections and now into the Infometrics that they are giving us a more accurate picture of our population projections moving forward, and that's why we continue to use those. So as I say, it's an important distinction, and he's raised an issue, but just to be clear, that is why we spend the additional effort, because this is so important for our forward planning, so important for the numbers and the development information that goes into our long-term plan, that we do the best we can, and it is still projections, into our long-term plan. The other aspect of it, and I'll repeat this one too, is these are reviewed every 2 or 3 years. So you can see Stats New Zealand catching up with the reality of what's happening in our district, but equally as we go into each long-term plan, we reset this work and we again analyse what's happening in our district and in the Bay of Plenty against the national picture as well, which is the Stats New Zealand picture. So again, I say I just find it difficult to people finding research to point back to say, hey, this is different. Are we wrong? Actually, we're spending more money, more investment to make sure we get a nuanced product here that more accurately reflects what's happening in our community.
Thank you, JP. Councillor McPherson asked if he could table it. I accepted that, and I also accept that you have given a response to this. I am not going to, I do not want to labour this any further. We've heard your response, and I'm going to move on with the questions to the presentation, the excellent presentation that you and Damien gave to us. So I'm going to leave it there, councillors. I think that's best. Thank you. So I do have already Mr. Piacini Tule. You were the first one. Thank you.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Kia ora koro. Thank you, Damon. Thank you, JP. I kind of note that there was no mention of Te Aroa in this report, unlike the previous report. So it just kind of prompted me to ask, how are you considering and incorporating the Te Aroa Māori order housing model, if any? And a second question is, what's your thinking on the deindustrialisation of areas like Ngāpuna?
The Te Aroa housing model stuff that's been developed up by Te Tātou, remember this is a market economics analysis of land and feasibility. I think the question you're asking is actually critical to what we do next. So this gives us a land use requirements, economic feasibility, but actually how we interpret that into how do we ensure we get thriving communities and good homes and environmental responses and public transport and sustainability effectively goes to the next part, which is the plan changes, the rules in our plans, design guides, and probably more important, how we express our culture through something like the CBD. So that's the piece where, as I say, this is a technical document. I think the work that Te Tātou's done on the wellbeing sort of wheel, sorry, that's my simple description of it, is actually a critical input of who we are that needs to be brought forward into the plans and the specific deliverables and design guides. And the second part was?
The deindustrialisations of areas like Ngāpuna.
Yeah, and I think that goes to some of the responses that you're actually seeing. And so you saw here a conclusion that we actually need to start focusing more on light industrial opportunities. And so we've actually got almost a regeneration or a redevelopment to start trying to address those deficiencies that exist in our city. So having adequate business parks and of a high quality, high standard is actually critical for us to start seeing the shift of heavy to new locations or heavy to light. At the moment, one is eating the other because of the greater demand, but actually we need to make sure we've got business parks that are in the right places and don't affect neighbouring communities.
Councillor Maxwell? Oh, right, thank you. Oh, you can have a question now. All right, thank you. Oh, it was around the other one. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Councillor Yates.
Tēnā koe, and through you, Madam Chair. Tēnā kōrua. I have two questions. First question is with regards to improved parking opportunities, I suppose, when we look at CBD redevelopment and the investment in future parking management strategies. When we're looking at those for CBD and mode shifts, is that taking into consideration potentially parking alternatives that may not be in the CBD for inner city living residents who may still choose to have a car?
I think the reality is we're planning this, remember that was for the medium to long term, so it's planning for a number of things that could change in the future. So we were talking about driverless cars, etc. We know that certainly the way things are going is that we would expect to see, both from a climate change management perspective, but also from a city living perspective, that ultimately you would see a net loss of parkings within the area where people would be living. But that doesn't discount that there could be a solution right next to the CBD for parking. It's just saying that there needs to be, it's just highlighting the fact that there needs to be a strategy that needs to deal with a changing landscape, with more people living in areas that previously just been commercial. So the commercial model is that, you know, you provide parkings in that commercial space for that service, but when you got people living there, it's the same as having a residential development.
I think there's even in the medium term, with the removal of sort of parking requirements, one of the things we're talking to the regional council about, and Stavros might be able to add to this, is the use of our public transport has declined quite significantly. So that's not a good environmental outcome, and again that suggests that we've got more vehicles moving around the city than we should, and we need to start figuring out, well, what do we need to do to start correcting some of that. So if you and I won't use our city, I'll use Wellington, very tightly constrained parking drives high patronage on public transport or modal shift. So we have the luxury of a significant availability of parking, and we're an easy city to get around. So those are always challenges to public transport use. But I think as more and more people make environmental choices about their transport, hopefully we'll see that behaviour change. But we also need to make sure the public transport system is useful and effective, and I think that's part of the Regional Council's review at the moment. So there is a strategy longer term discussion, but actually just to get people to consider other modes of transport is really critical for us, even in the short and medium term. I don't know if Stavros wants to add anything.
You have another one, do you?
Yes, just quickly. I just noticed the diagram up there. I was a little bit puzzled because I thought, oh, good, we're looking at Napier or Hastings. So can you explain why that has been used?
You see, I think just if you look at the fourth bullet on that last slide, which is immediate steps, we didn't really go into it in detail, but it talks to accessibility modelling and demand analysis. So this is the logical next step after we've done the HPA. And that's an insert, and it's an example of the next level of analysis that we need to do. So it's an example of what's been done elsewhere in Napier. But effectively, that's what we need to land on, is really having a good handle on those areas that would support higher density. I think it was signalled in the presentation that we've got a very limited area that's zoned for higher density. So in order for us to be quite precise, taking this capacity modelling into a planning environment, we need to understand which areas would support that. And examples of that, or that essentially what that map's showing is where the locations where you see a high level of access in terms of transport, schools, playgrounds, open space, community services, and the clustering of those areas are naturally areas that support higher density. So for our planning in terms of potential plan changes, but also in terms of where we provide better quality amenity and services, we need to know those areas, because we know that once we start intensifying, we need to offset that intense development with good quality amenity. So when you start losing, I suppose, your private open space, you expect the public open space to be that much better, that because you'll be accessing that more. So that's an important piece of work that signals the next step.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, JP. Thank you, Damien. Damien, I think that was a very rational overview of your presentation, and I was quite enlightened. My question is, and it surrounds the fact that our population is about 75,000, Queenstown's is about 15,000. Queenstown has developed another, in the last couple of years, a shopping complex with lots of housing around it, and that is the 5 Mile shopping complex. More fuller, more progressive as towards lots of businesses lots of people can go there for multiple stuff, supermarkets, warehouse, lots of smaller shops as well. Are we going to, because Rotorua has concentrated lots of satellite shopping area, where in other areas, are we going to be looking at something like that 5 Mile shopping complex going forward with the base on housing? And also, does our district plan, or do we need a unitary authority because going forward, this is such a huge plan, are we capable at the moment with where our staffing lies, or do we need?
So two things, and I think it carries on from Damon's presentation about that accessibility mapping. So one of the pieces there that it enables you to have a conversation about what suburban centres need to be lifted up in their ability to develop. So you're right, we have a myriad of neighbourhood shops and access to that, which is all about walkable communities and things like that. But there is actually some nodes where we actually have some key suburban centres. So a bit like this accessibility stuff, that starts saying, actually, there are locations that can be upzoned so that you could put a bigger supermarket or a bigger set of shops in place. Do you put some medium density housing around that to actually give you more of a set of suburban centres rather than what we've currently had and always had, which is lots of little neighbourhood shops, the hairdresser and the fish and chip shop. Yeah.
One thing though that we need to be very careful of, I think, is the CBD and the ability to potentially undermine the CBD. So I think certainly strengthening our current centres around providing better opportunity for residential living, but in terms of increasing floor space, particularly in relation to, I suppose, retail and office, we need to be very considered, because we know that we want apartments to happen within the CBD, and we know that a key anchor for that is really having that mixed-use lifestyle, so you've got access to retail at your doorstep and good quality office. So I think it's just a rider that it was highlighted in the HPA, is that just whatever the intentions are externally, you don't want to suck more business and any potential out of the CBD, which effectively is large as it is already in terms of extent. So I think that decision always needs to be considered in terms of our purpose and the ability to revitalise the CBD going forward.
quick answer on Auckland's a unitary. There's a small number of unitaries around the country where they actually have simply the regional council functions within the territorial local authority. I think we don't have that. So we like the majority of TLAs. There is a regional council that we need to work closely with to achieve all of our goals. Now that's really whether that's right or wrong is a question that the government's no doubt going to grapple with in the future of local government.
Thank you. Your Worship?
And thanks for bringing this together and having your whole team here. It's great to see them because I'm aware of how hard they've worked to get this to us today, because these are very, very tight time frames. And an urban planner is a great asset to have on our council. Wonderful. But for me, the question is, where do the design features come in? So I think we're accepting that this is a transformational change and we're going to go up, we're going to intensify, but the community wants to know that we're going to build good stuff. And I see Kaingaroa named on the document. Where does that design come into either the national policy statement or the new bill that, great to have, enabling this to happen faster? But that is of concern to the community groups that I've been talking to, especially elements of wood, dare I say it. You know, why aren't we building in wood, and how high can we go with the capacity that we've got in some of our manufacturers here?
I think just to answer your question, I think just in relation to obviously this, we had identified the fact that our medium density zone was undercooked. It's a lot smaller. We need to expand it. And I think we certainly through this have realized that we need to be thinking about an intensification plan change, or plan change that enables more housing and denser forms of housing. So I think off the back of that, the discussion has been that effectively we need to have good design controls. When we do that plan change, we need to effectively look at a tool, essentially a non-statutory tool that is aligned to our district plan, the performance standards, where we can actually manage design outcomes. So it's factored into the process going forward in terms of how we deliver an intensification plan change. And I think the key thing would be to have a good understanding of what best practice topologies will look like across the housing continuum, so that effectively, you know, we can provide guidance not only to developers but also to our consenting team, because this is new. A lot of this topology is new to Rotorua, so it's certainly factored into our thinking going forward.
I'd just add, this goes to another of a whole bunch of tensions that exist in RMA planning, which is make it easy, let me do what I want, versus strong guidance and parameters to guide how and what it should be. So we go back to that kind of situation, and I think Damon's talked about, you know, if we do well on communicating and thinking about a design guide, it's a non-statutory. So we're actually having to start thinking about, we need to get homes built over here. Here's our guides, here's our guidance, but we've still got to make that pathway as quickly and simply as possible. So it goes to a fundamental tension between prescriptive and for us enabling, but equally here is a chance for us to probably step into a place we haven't done well, which is to really put in place a lovely design guide that actually gives good information so our local consultants and planners can help developers achieve this. But they've picked up the nuances about what this needs to look like and feel like and the values that underpin our community.
One quick follow-up on that. I think it was good that you raised design, because I think we are chasing a housing number, and I think that's the big thing that we want, is to see houses. But I think what we're left with is the cumulative effect of all that housing. So whatever that ends up being, whatever that housing stock is, it's a reflection of what our destination will be in the future. So we need to manage that along the way. And so outcomes are very important, and we shouldn't lose sight of the outcome component. It's not just essentially getting people into houses, it's also about what kind of communities we want to develop.
Thank you. Jeff, would you like to add something?
If I can just make a comment, I've just noticed the last series of questions have really been questions about the future, whereas this current presentation is really a baseline document about where have we come from, what are our current needs, and some of the high-level pointers as to where to go next. The document doesn't try at this particular point is to start to get into discussion about the nature of design, where are we going to actually have suburban centres, how are they going to be supported. So there's some directions that have been indicated here in terms of next steps, but we can't at this particular point go into detail on those because the first step was really the baseline. Where are we? What are actually our high-level needs? And what is the current level of challenge that we actually need to respond to?
Thank you, Jeff. I'll carry on with councillors' questions. Councillor Kai Fong, then Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. JP, could you just go back to that slide with the bottom lines? So are we saying that we need for the national policy statement to show that that is what we consider to be plan-enabled and infrastructure-ready numbers of housing, or are we simply saying that that's the number of houses we need in terms of our population and other growth projections?
The housing bottom lines is just reflecting demand. So it's just reflecting the number of houses we need. It's not the number of houses that are infrastructure enabled, or it's not reflecting land that's feasible and reasonably expected to be realised. That's purely based on the infometric projections, plus the deficit added in there and the additional 15% in the long term for competition and 20% in the medium term and short term. So it's a reflection of the demand. So a reflection of population growth and the number of households we need.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just a follow-up question on that. But it's just because in your paper it says that the national policy statement was that we're trying to show what is our plan-enabled infrastructure ready. So if these are not infrastructure ready, then I know Jeff's told us we're not meant to be looking at what the future is, but obviously intensification is one of the ways in which we would deal with infrastructure-ready land or suitability for building as opposed to greenfield development for this bottom line number of dwellings.
Yeah. Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, and I think that goes, so this is, when you look at that, sufficient zoned and served and feasible. So this is what we need for our community going forward. So that's why they're asking you to build it into your district plan, because the expectation is that is what this district plan should deliver. Your comment around how that gets delivered actually goes to some of the conversations we had with spatial plan, and is obviously going to be part of our strategies moving forward, is how you serve that and what's the proportion that's infill, so or within our current urban footprint, and how much needs to be accommodated in the greenfield discussions. So some of the work we'd done previously was to say, look, until we start getting in under this and we start looking at that intensification enablement, 50-50 feels about right at this stage, which is a significant change. So actually over time we should actually see a higher proportion going into infill if we've done our right job on those intensification and enablement and put it in the right areas. We should see a proportion that starts actually supporting homes going or dwellings going into our current urban footprint of the smaller size that we're after, and less being required in the greenfield space. So that's kind of our long-term sustainability kind of question. It's got to be turned into the city as opposed to out of the city. So yes, these become our bottom lines of saying, hey, this is what we need to achieve. How we're going to do that is the key of those plan changes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, if I just one further question. Just in relation to the business land capacity, it was around the need for further land available for tourism accommodation. So do we see that as being new land for development or redevelopment of existing land?
New zoning. Yeah. We were just having that conversation. It's the new zoned land as well. So one of the things I think that we need to start looking at, obviously we've got a zoning capable of doing that in the CBD and on Fenton Street. There is other options we need to start looking at, ensuring that it becomes that multi-use, mixed-use options, that we're actually enabling more options across the city, as well as ensuring that we're seeing that investment into that CBD core, which was one of our objectives around the spatial plan. Turn ourselves and our view towards our lake.
Thank you.
Follow up on that is just to remember that's also the long term. So there's sufficient accommodation in the short and medium term, but in 30 years we need to have more zoned land for accommodation. So I think a lot happens between now and 2030 in terms of how that plays out. But we are obligated through the NPS to look to that horizon. So it's a long-term picture of demand.
And I think just one more point about that accommodation piece that worth making, and Andrew touched on it in the earlier presentation about the destination management plan. That has been one of our challenges, is the number of beds in our accommodation sector, and if I crudely say the star ratings. He made the comment about the yield difference between ourselves and Queenstown. If you drill into that, the number of self-reported 4 and 5 star in Queenstown, for example, might be 40, 50% or even higher. We can circulate that information to it, where for us it's down at the 10 to 20%. So we have a disproportionate mix of accommodation in the 2, 3 star if you're lucky, and that's part of that transformation of our tourism and economy into that higher value space. It starts with accommodation.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't have a question. I just wondered if you were going to allow some comments on this plan at some point.
Oh, yes, I will. Thank you. Thank you.
Signal that I've got a comment.
Councillor Tapsell. We're just about there. Thank you. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Thank you very much for this work. I feel like it's the missing piece of the puzzle with this problem that we've been trying to solve. And the lack of housing is affecting all parts of Rotorua. Every single suburb has faced significant and sometimes twofold increases on not only housing, like the housing affordability to purchase, but also to rent. So the information in this really brings to light the clear need for intensification and the opportunities that actually come with that as well. My first question I have is on this as well. Now, I see short-term 3 years, that starts at 2020 when we're almost at the end of 2021. So does that then mean that in the next year, we actually need an additional 3,000 dwellings? And then I'll carry on with my next question.
The short answer is yes. We're starting from a position of net deficit. So you're absolutely right. One of the things that Jason, is head of the planning and development team, is doing is he's really mapping clearly the number of subdivisions which are coming through, which is steadily increasing. And we'll provide you some more information probably at the next meeting about a significant number of additional lots and consents that have gone through. But there is a lag between land use consent and a house or a building built on it. So again, it's starting to build that picture of us starting to address a deficit and ramping up, but that is taking time, and it probably goes to the similar question around the tourism sector workforce planning, which is another critical element for us to ensure that there is some way of building up our capacity to build more homes more quickly. So you're right, that shows that we're probably going to miss that target, but it does show that we've got to get our trajectory right of starting to build that momentum moving forward. So some of the decisions you'll start making later, and again this is the baseline, about what we need to plan enable is critical to that ability for us to see a ramping up of homes being built across our city.
Yeah, thank you, JP, and thank you to Jason and the team that have been working really hard over a number of years as soon as we started seeing this significant growth in our population. But that leads me to my next question. In the report, it shows that the demand analysis shows that we need smaller households, as you've mentioned, 1 person to couples, but it also shows that smaller site sizes will help to increase housing affordability. So what I'm really I have a burning desire, I suppose you could say, is to actually give people the tools to be able to realise their own dreams for housing. And for many of our families in Rotorua, that means that if you do have this large lot section, which you've mentioned, I think average of 400 square metres or something, that actually allows people to open up their backyard for their children or for their elderly parents and be able to build a second or a minor dwelling on there, therefore making it much more affordable if they're only paying for the build instead of the land. So when we consider opening that up, which I hope we do as soon as possible, how are we placed in terms of how we've currently planned for the infrastructure required? I ask that because it's also noted that in the council LTP, approximately $60 million of growth projects, including infrastructure, are planned to be implemented over the next 10 years. So as we start to see and realise what the best opportunities are for us to implement straight away, are we actually also looking at the requirement for further investment or further planning than what we already have in the 10-year plan? And I say this because it will ultimately affect people's rates, and we want that to be another unaffordable option on their books too.
I think, and I'll look across as Stavros here, some of the significant projects we have in the long-term plan around wastewater treatment plant upgrades and also water supplies start providing the capacity for the additional homes coming into our city and into our district. So there is that capacity that's being created in some of the major projects going forward. The area that became the biggest problem for us is still that question around stormwater. So you put a second going on site, you do more infill, you get more services, more water runs off. So stormwater management against the applications of change was our big issue. So recall our infrastructure fund really start looking at bringing forward 30 years with stormwater infrastructure. Of time to raise the community, bring it forward and to make this an affordable equation to bring those homes into our community.
Thank you. Thank you. Could I please have a mover and a seconder that the report housing, Rotorua Housing and Business Development Capacity Assessment be received? No, that's wrong. I've already done that. So I'm just going to ask for any, yes, just any discussion questions now, or any discussion on this. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I also would like to acknowledge what's been a huge piece of work. So congratulations. I love what you're recommending in terms of mixed-use zoning in the medium density areas. I recall Professor Terry Stevens coming through here and talking about the top flight resorts around the world, and certainly saw that in Whistler, where you have commercial with residential above. So a really successful model. The Chief Executive warned us against future-focused questions, but, you know, looking to the future with this plan is actually dealing with what the crisis we have in the present. And I love also the suggestion that we go higher, and I like the thought that ply scrapers may be the answer for high-quality wooden apartment buildings in our city in the future. I just wanted to also thoroughly endorse you taking the Infometrics nuanced approach to population projections. I'm mindful, and I talked about this in LTP forums, of the Liam Dan NZ Herald Business article where he pointed out in 2004 Stats NZ predicted New Zealand's population would reach 5 million in 2050, and we got there, sailed past it actually, 30 years early. So, and look, just 3 days ago, we had Dr. Ganesh Nana, formerly from Burl, formerly from Rotor Economic Development Board, and now the Chair of the Productivity Commission. talking about the risks around the pre-pandemic immigration settings, and yet we hear the tensions from employers wanting to open the floodgates to bring more immigrant workers into New Zealand. So that'll be a political risk that needs to be factored into that nuanced approach to population protection. So I thoroughly endorse the route you've taken in this plan by using that infometrics approach. Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Oh, thank you. Oh, sorry. Yes, Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, this is just probably a question directed for you, if maybe they can answer. We have a wood first policy while we're trying to develop this, but isn't there a shortage of wood at the moment? And it continues to be so.
Well, if there is, well, yes, there is. I think I'm not quite sure, but we do hear something like that. But I don't know whether it's really, your question is really relevant to the discussion today. Thank you. Look, thank you very much for the report. I was thinking when I was listening to some of the questions, JP, I perhaps myself would have preferred, I would have benefited from a brief workshop on this, because this is significant, and I'm still trying to get my head around some of the things that I've been hearing and seeing in the report. So I don't know if it might benefit anybody else, but I would welcome the opportunity, because it's so significant. And I would welcome the opportunity just perhaps for an hour's workshop, if it could be factored in at some stage. I think it'd be very beneficial.
Madam Chair, I'll take that suggestion as being a really positive one. It does give us the chance to, not quite in such a formal setting, talk about the whys. It gives us the chance to talk about some of the things that underpin the nuanced approach to the thinking that now has to go into how do we plan and build our way forward, and what does that mean for teams and focus. So it would be quite helpful. So I'll look at an opportunity for maybe we could schedule something.
Thank you. And to the team too that put it together, and it's really exciting. This is the second exciting report that we've had today. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Now, could I have a mover and a seconder, please, that we go into public excluded, and the reasons are for commercial sensitivity and for the information to be kept confidential at this stage. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Thank you, Your Worship. It's been moved and seconded that we move into public excluded session. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried.